Today's episode is brought to you by Taft Law and its Franchise Advance Program, a one-of-a-kind program developed by your host, Josh Brown, to help entrepreneurs assess, convert, and grow your business the right way through sound franchise structures. To learn more, go to taftlaw.com and type Franchise Advance Program in the search bar.
If you think like, act like, or are trying to grow like a franchise, then the Franchise Euphoria podcast is for you. Hello and welcome everybody. Josh Brown here, and I created this podcast for one main goal: to help people who are trying to grow their business through franchising or franchise-like structures to do it the right way. I've been practicing law now as a franchise lawyer for many, many years, and I've seen it done the right way and the wrong way. And this podcast is not filled with a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo. Rather, I talk with real people, people who have been there, have done it, are doing it right now. And I also dive deep into specific topics related to franchising. So if this is of interest to you, you are at the right place. Enjoy. Welcome back to Franchise Euphoria. On this episode, I'm thrilled to have on Michael Slupecki, who joined Griswold Home Care in 2020 as its Chief Executive Officer and is responsible for leading the development, operations, and execution of Griswold's short and long-term strategies. His career in home care began in 2004 when he joined a domestic franchise home health care, home hospice, and healthcare staffing company as their controller. Over his tenure, he was elevated to Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer, transforming the organization into a multinational franchisor of in-home medical and non-medical care, managing 3 brands across 7 countries with a combined network of over 500 franchise locations. Welcome to the show, Michael. Great to have you here.
Hey, thanks a lot, Josh. I appreciate you bringing me on.
Well, I love talking to people who have experience in franchising, and you obviously have that. And one of the areas that for many years now, and it's certainly not slowing down, of growth in franchising is in the healthcare area. And so I always love having people on to talk about the healthcare franchises because they span the medical and the non-medical. And I've had the fortune to be involved with a lot of those, but I always think it's valuable for the audience, to understand sort of the distinctions between the medical, non-medical, and the different franchise systems out there in the healthcare space. So thanks for coming on. And before we dive into that, tell us a little bit more about yourself. And it sounds like you've been involved with different franchise networks and companies for many, many years now.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so I did start out my franchise career in another brand that was in the home health care, home hospice, and healthcare staffing area. And that's kind of where, I kind of grew up. I also was exposed at the time. We had about 25 company-owned locations. So along with, franchising is obviously an industry in and of itself, but what makes you really a better asset to your franchisee is actually rolling up your sleeves and having run those businesses yourself. And so that was my initial experience. Was I was heavily involved with our company-owned locations when I joined that brand back in 2004, and I really think that helped us. We eventually franchised all of our locations in that brand, but having that core operational experience to really help our franchisees, succeed, I think was kind of invaluable as an entryway into this business.
Well, there couldn't have been a better time for you to come on with Griswold 2020. I mean, right? Right on the heels of a lot of things happening. So let's talk about that, because you joined and took over as Chief Executive Officer in 2020. So talk about Griswold before you came and then how you got over there.
So, the company, we celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. So it's a brand that's been around quite a long time. I joined in February of 2020, so right before, the whole world changed, if you will. And, that in my experience coming into this company, it was different. In some respects, I would have, even though so it was a family, a family started this brand in 1982. It's a great story of the minister's wife, who really, they lost a parishioner really due to neglect, is, how I would phrase it. And that was what the mission began, the minister's wife starting it at the kitchen table. And even though, I guess 38 years later when I joined, it still has that real family culture almost. And so, that was the first challenge in a sense. I wouldn't call it a challenge. It was just, you're wanting to come in without losing that family culture and restart the whole kind of professional growth strategy to kind of get the growth trajectory going a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I mean, had it become a little bit stagnant? Had the growth just stagnated a little bit?
We had only, we really hadn't focused on franchise sales for a number of years. And as if you are well experienced in franchising, long tenured franchisees typically slow down, right? All your growth is initially at the outset when you start and you ramp up, and then you kind of hit that level of maturity. And so if you're not constantly, putting new franchisees into the funnel, your growth just naturally slows as the franchisees that started 20, 30 years ago start to kind of cap out and top out and hit their level of comfort in some respects. And so, it was kind of restarting that engine a little bit was a big piece. But then right as I started, 6 weeks later, we're into a pandemic. And so what really happened then is all those things that you were thinking about for, the months before your first day, are all tabled as you're dealing with all the things that happened in March of 2020.
Yeah, and so you come in there and tell us about Griswold Home Care, because there's many different kinds of home care. There's non-medical, there's medical, there's the combination of both. What does Griswold focus on? Do they do both medical and non-medical, or just focus on the non-medical side?
Yeah, so that's and again, I don't want to overcomplicate or oversimplify, but yes, we definitely are in the non-medical side. And while it's really defined, folks like to define it based on the types of people we're putting into the home, because, most states have two different licenses. Do you want to have a license to just provide kind of that companionship and assistance with the activities of daily living, or do you want to be providing, skilled services? But the corollary to that is, you could say 90% of that non-medical is paid out of the family's pocket, or private pay, we like to say. But then if you flip over to the other side, on the skilled side, 90% of that is coming from a government agency. And so there's two sides to the coin. I played in that space for 13 years.
On the medical side.
On the medical side. And I was actually happy to kind of get out of that, because just the government, so much of it is outside of your control. So many of the companies that are on that side, they're getting hit both ways. They're not getting increases in reimbursement, while at the same time they're getting requirements to raise up the minimum wage in certain areas, or they're dealing with wage inflation that's happening at a faster pace than the government reimbursement is upticking. So there's just that dynamic there. But as the world evolves, what's happening now is that the insurance companies and even the government agencies and CMS are recognizing the value of that non-medical space in keeping somebody safe at home. So we really see the future as separating ourselves from the traditional non-medical home care businesses, while at the same time not going all the way to the government reimbursement world, but trying to bridge the two to really be a healthcare solution without providing healthcare.
Yeah, and for those who are listening who aren't familiar as you are and I am with sort of this healthcare area, I think and you fill in the gaps here a little bit for me, Michael. But essentially, if I were to sum it up in terms of medical, non-medical, essentially what you have is every state has its own statutes, every state has its own regulations as to care for seniors. And so there's statutory definitions that can help define what's non-medical and medical. So every state's a little bit different. But on the non-medical side, you basically are a company that families come to. They pay out of pocket. They pay private pay, so there's not an insurance reimbursement component. And you provide caregivers and people to help them in their home with companionship and non-medical type services. And again, it depends on which state you're in and everything. But as an example, for a real world example, because I know this can get confusing to people, is, you can tell as a non-medical, generally speaking, you could tell one of the patients or the customers, clients that you have, you could say, hey, you need to take your medication now. But you can't actually give them the medication because that would often qualify as some sort of nursing related service or something elevated above beyond a non-medical caregiver. So you run into all those kinds of scenarios. But when you run into the medical side, as you're saying, you're dealing with a lot of reimbursement type issues because a lot of those are covered by insurance. But then you add the whole other element of the government bureaucracies that come into play. So what you guys do is you do the non-medical side, but try to just do it in a way so that you're distinguishing yourself from other non-medical caregivers and providers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because if all we're doing is providing, a companion, and we're not really looking at the person critically, if you will, from their health perspective, so much of somebody's, and again, you can see the documentation. The whole healthcare ecosystem is trying to prevent a hospitalization. And as a family member, the last thing, you want your mom to do is take a ride in an ambulance. And so we feel like we know we can have a big part of that in a non-medical setting. And whether that's ensuring, they're eating healthy, and whether that's ensuring that there's no trip hazards, there's no fall risks, social interaction kind of helps combat depression. There are just so many areas that we can touch, without, to your example, we can't touch the pill box. We can't give an injection. We can't do anything that's medically related, but still have a big impact on the wellness aspects of their lives.
Every company, every business in every sector of our economy is suffering from labor issues to one degree or another. Talk to me about that with Griswold Home Care, because obviously, one thing about the non-medical business is you guys are only as good as the people who are out there providing those services. The caregiver is everything. That's the touch point between the client and your service. They recognize. So that's everything. How's that been for you over, coming out of, COVID's one thing, but just coming out of COVID as we're kind of moving beyond that, how's that been for you? What are you seeing on the labor side?
Yeah, it's improving. It's definitely improving. It's still a challenge. The same thing that we all experienced, over COVID, when your favorite restaurant was now closed 2 nights a week. We were struggling with where did all the people go, like many companies. It has definitely loosened a little bit, and we're meeting lots of great people, and everybody's hyper-focused on perfecting, the recruitment strategies, and also making sure the folks, that are working for you, know that they're appreciated and recognized, because you're right. We don't make widgets. Our product is people. Our product are caregivers. And, we try to, and obviously invest in training, invest in, recognition programs and tokens of appreciation is what we've moved to with this rebrand. It's exactly what we have to do, is to find the best people and keep them.
And you've got over 170 locations at this point, looking to expand. You're clearly in a market that's not shrinking, seniors, senior care. I got to imagine you're getting a lot of interest. Talk to me about the type of franchisee prospect that you guys are looking for. I mean, who's a good fit for the Griswold Home Care model to come in and become a franchisee?
Yeah, I look for three things, and everyone I meet, I tell them the same three things. One is, do they have that leadership skill? Because as we were just talking about, we're a people business, and A players don't work for B bosses. And if I don't have an A at the top, I'm not going to have an A in the coordinator seat, and I'm not going to attract the best caregivers. So I feel like from a leadership perspective, it starts, at the top. And at the same time, that person has to have empathy, because a family has to trust them. People don't necessarily put the same value in the brand as a fast food. You go to a fast food, you don't know if it's franchise owned, you don't know if it's company owned. But when you go to a franchise and you meet the owner, would I trust this person with my mom is kind of that second test. Would I work for them, and would I trust them with my mom? And then the third thing we look for too is, this is going to sound different, but money has to be a motivator, but it can't be their primary motivator. Everybody does this to earn a living, but they have to really have that mission aspect too, because it's a 24/7 job, and you can find an easier job. But if you really want to help people and give back to the community and improve people's lives, you have to take some of the returns on your investment emotionally.
Do you find that most of the people are you looking for single unit operators? Or are you guys more focused on multiple units, people who can come in and not only get one area up and going, but multiple areas? The owners have to be so involved so that, on the one hand, you could say, maybe it's more focused on one unit, but at the same time, so many franchise systems look at multiple unit operators.
No, that's a really good question. And we really do feel like the strength is, the owner operated model. We have groups that have opened multiple and been very successful. And so, we're certainly not opposed. At the same time, we're really not usually high on, hey, I represent a group of investors and we want to come in and buy, 10 franchises. That's not our model. We would say no to those folks, all day long. But the ones that, hey, look, I don't want to just stop at one. Well, then let's talk about your strategy. How are you going to ensure that same level of commitment in location 2 that you're going to bring to location 1? And let's talk through that. Do you have another family member? Do you have somebody that's a partner and the two of you can basically be co-owners and you run this one and they run that one? We're fine, but there's got to be somebody with that level of commitment to be meeting with the families.
So let's talk a little bit about the brand and the design and how, sort of what you've done since you've come on in 2020 to try to differentiate Griswold from the competitors.
Sure. Yeah, I think, again, having been really in this industry for nearly 20 years, I think one of the things I've always recognized is that the similarities, between the brands that exist right now, it's all hearts, hands, and houses. And Griswold, was no different. And it was one of those day one things that I wanted to look at. At the same time, I didn't come in really with the expertise, so we started having conversations with some experts. And then I really, 9 months after I started, I found a really great vice president of marketing that had the same approach or had the same vision. And we really dug into it. And it was over a year process where we did surveys, because, everybody thinks of branding as that visual, but the visual is only a manifestation of the core of who your identity is. And so it really started with what's our identity? What's our commonalities? What's our behaviors? What's our traits? What's our isms, if you will? And then it evolved into the visual brand that is that connection of people and connections that our new brand represents. But that was kind of the end, even though I think, we had the vision of freshening our brand and making it more, current, have it be more innovative, have it separate ourselves. But truly, it was more important to become very centered on who we are and what makes us different.
So what are you thinking in terms of, we're here at the relative start of, 2023 going forward, coming out of, some tough times here over the last couple of years. What are you hoping for growth-wise for Griswold going forward?
Sure. Look, like I think a lot of companies, we have a solid group of franchisees, and we're in a great position. So many of these emerging brands, they really need to sell franchises to keep the lights on. And we're lucky enough not to be in that position because of the strength of our tenured franchisees. So we're not looking to just sell. We want to be more selective, if you will. I would be content, with a dozen, I guess 12 to 18 solid new franchises would really, and again, that's going to just grow our royalty growth rates and things like that. But that's really what our focus is. We have, a core group that's growing at kind of market growth rates, but to really push those market growth rates above market is really to add new units. And that's a big part of our focus.
Well, if you'd like to learn more about the Griswold Home Care franchise, you can go to griswoldhomecarefranchise.com. That's Griswold, and it's spelled Griswold, homecarefranchise.com. Michael, thank you for coming on. I want to finish off with one question that is more general in nature as opposed to specific to Griswold, and that is, with your wealth of experience, going back all these years, what do you think is one of the keys or a couple of the keys in turning a emerging brand into a solid franchise brand? We all know there's a lot of franchises out there, and there's many, many good ones. Unfortunately, there's some bad ones too. So we always look for best practices here. And I'm curious, based on your experience, some of the things you've learned over the years.
Yeah, and maybe I'm probably a little bit of an anomaly because, the other brand I was with was also a 40-plus year brand that was very established and mature and had that core. But I think we all know that choosing the wrong franchisee is very painful. It's 3 years on, you'd give that feedback. And I think just being selective, and we always took this approach where, this person that we're talking to is trusting us, with sometimes their life savings. And while their success or lack thereof may not move our needle, it's going to definitely move their needle personally, right? So I think you're doing them a good thing to not sell them a franchise if they're really not a good fit for your brand. And that's what I think has been I have, unfortunately, taken a couple checks with people that you weren't sure about. And in hindsight, you wish you trusted your gut and said, this business isn't a fit for you. I'm sure you can do well in another brand, another industry. But I think as an industry, we should be that thoughtful with people's money. And I'm afraid too many brands, are taking checks from anybody that'll write one. And I think as time will prove that, being selective and doing the right thing is what pays off.
It's an interesting point, and it's one that I wish I could blast to the masses, because I think that's one of the biggest things I see as well is people, emerging franchisors. And I work with a lot of them. I know a lot of them. They are just such a rush to get more people on. And I'm, oftentimes growing slower at the start and getting the right people really gives you the ability and the foundation to grow faster a little bit later. I think it also ties into your point earlier, which you said at the outset, talking about operating of corporate locations. I'm a big proponent, and every case is a little bit different, but generally speaking, of franchisors also having corporate locations. Not just because, as you said, it kind of keeps them in touch with the realities of what's going on the ground and gives them that experience. But additionally, it gives them the additional revenue to, I think, be able to discern more between a good franchisee prospect and one that may be good in another brand, but not their brands. In other words, it takes away some of that financial pressure if you're also running successful corporate locations. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so just on that note, I did inherit six company-owned locations with Griswold. And I plan on, I don't want to grow. I don't want the tail to wag the dog. Of course, I want those to grow. But I want to keep my foot in that pool because it allows us to experiment as well. We're piloting a senior-specific wearable right now. It would have been hard to try that out with a franchisee because it can be a distraction. And guess what? What if it doesn't work and I've just distracted, this franchisee on something that doesn't work? So it gives us great flexibility, and it also gives us credibility. When we talk to our franchisees and we come up and we learn something and we come up with a different strategy for recruitment or retention and showing them the before and after we made this change and here's what it's done to the metrics. I think it's really key, and I plan on keeping the ones I have, but not have it overgrow the fact that we're a franchise company.
Well, thank you again, Michael, for coming on. It really seems like, you're now at this point in 2023, probably really starting to implement some things due to the last couple of years, obviously, but sounds like you're on a good track, and a 40 plus year brand. I mean, that's something to be proud of. And it sounds like you're well on your way to continue to grow that. So thank you for taking a little bit of time here today to speak with us on Franchise Euphoria. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I appreciate you having us.
Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Franchise Euphoria. If you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. It really helps to get this show out to more and more people. Also, if you have any questions, have ideas for guests or topics, please email me, josh@indyfranchiselaw.com. That's Josh at franchiselaw.com. And finally, please note that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes and is not in any way, shape, or form meant to be any kind of legal advice. If you're seeking legal advice, please contact a lawyer. Have a great one. Happy franchising.